Yeah, I wanted to put this at the beginning of the episode, but maybe I'll just make a note of it. But I've been running a fundraiser for this young man, Muhammad, in Gaza. He is taking care of his siblings. His parents were martyred about 10 years ago. He's sort of, basically this orphan story. And he's been taking care of his siblings for a long time. And they've been displaced 5 times in this war. And I got him to film some footage for me, and I was going to make a video. And then he sent it when I was traveling, and I couldn't get to it. And by the time I got to it, he had to flee his home again. So even the home that he had of tents that I have on camera is gone too. So I'm hoping the people who are listening to this, if you can help him out, we can cheer him up. Maybe we can get some donations. If you're listening to this and you're a fan of Taking Therapy, and you're a fan of the podcasts, please consider helping Mohammed out. I haven't told him that I'm doing this. It's just like a little surprise I want for him to I want to see him get the wake up one day and be like, wow, it really went up, because they want to buy some solar panels. So like it's beyond now. We've actually sort of hoping to expand the fundraiser, because yeah, if you can help Muhammad out, please think of it. I'll put the link in the description.
Salam, hello, peace to everyone out there. This is Adnan Husain on the new channel, but I have a bunch of wonderful guests, so this might be called something like Tanky Therapy, Redux Light, something. Any rate, we've got a lot of wonderful people to come talk about the terrible things that are happening in our world, and hopefully by the end of it, give you some sense of hope or direction for action or ways to cope. We have, as I said, wonderful guests. And of course, we have to start with producer extraordinaire, Sina Rahmani. East is a podcast. You all know him. You may love him. You should love him. And we have other familiar people from the Tanky Therapy ensemble. We have Nora Barrrows-Friedman, who I just met for the first time properly. It's wonderful to have you here from the Electronic Intifada and all the great work that you do. Welcome, Nora.
Thank you so much. I feel very honored to be here. And I've been a big fan of yours for a long time, so this is very special to me.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, this is a new kind of platform to do, maybe different kinds of things than we do on Guerrilla History, but I'm very proud of that show. We keep doing it, and we're just trying to expand and bring more to the table with this new show and format. But Guerrilla History listeners will also be familiar with our additional guest and panelist, Alex Aviña. Welcome back to something I'm doing. I always love to have you on in any capacity, in any venue and format. It's wonderful to have you here as a fellow historian and a West Coaster. I guess we're all West Coasters except for Sina, who at least has, had some acquaintance with the West Coast. So he's an honorary West Coaster. But Alex, it's wonderful to see you. Welcome.
No, thank you so much, Adnan. Great to see you. Great to see all you comrades.
Well, after those greetings and enjoyable repartee, we do have to get into the sad state of our contemporary world and figure out what we could do to frame and understand it. And I thought maybe let's just start a little bit with what's been happening in the United States as it relates to the wider world. So I'm wondering, we've seen the terrible oppression and repression of political and academic inquiry and expression on U.S. university and college campuses. We've seen students be delisted and deregistered as students so that ICE could take them into custody and evacuate their visas to deport them. We've seen people who've been spirited out of their homes, students for their campus activity, trying to educate people and change their campuses for the better in terms of their complicity for the ongoing genocide in Gaza. it's really a new approach and policy. The far right has always targeted universities since the 1960s, when they thought we lost the culture war because institutions like the universities were taken over by the left. And it seems that under the guise of U.S. empire's expansion and total and unapologetic and unreflected, unmodulated support for Zionist aggression and genocide, that domestic rights and like academic freedom and freedom of expression are fully under assault in an effective way that hasn't been possible up to this point. Nora, maybe we'd start with you, since on the Electronic Intifada you talk regularly about not only what happens in Palestine and the region, but also, the repression that has been suffered by other hosts, in fact, on your show. What do you think is happening, and how do we understand and explain this sudden wave of very effective repression on universities? There's been, other forms of it before, but something is really transforming the university environment.
Yeah, I mean, we've been seeing the signs of this kind of repression and universities kind of opening the door for this kind of repression for years. I mean, I would say decades. I started reporting about the student movement back in like 2010 because it was expanding and growing. It wasn't just a Palestinian kind of core community group on campus. It wasn't just Palestinians or Arabs and Muslims organizing. It had kind of evolved into a very wide spectrum movement on campuses, and students were connecting the settler colonial project in Palestine to other, internationalist movements of indigenous, justice for indigenous people, and we saw how administrations all around the country, from here at UC Berkeley, for example, to NYU and Columbia, really trying to stem the tide of the student movement, this growing movement of militant solidarity with Palestine and Palestinian rights. And they tried, everything. I mean, they've tried repression. They've tried, using what's called the heckler's veto, trying to really punish students who would protest during events on campus where Israeli soldiers or Israeli, politicians, lawmakers would come and speak about Israel as the eternal victim, and really trying to drum up support for Zionism. So we saw universities also starting to collude with local, state, and federal lawmakers to try and figure out how to criminalize dissent on campus when it came to Palestine. And so I think, the framing that we're seeing now of, Columbia University, for example, the framing is like Columbia is capitulating to the Trump administration's demands for criminalization of having a political opinion on Palestine. But I really think that it's not really capitulation. I think that this has been what Columbia itself as an institution has always wanted, ultimately, is to get rid of inquiry on Palestine. They're getting rid of the Center for Palestine Studies on campus. They have, railroaded students and faculty and scholars, because of their academic, teachings about Palestine, because of their involvement with Students for Justice in Palestine or Faculty for Justice in Palestine. Colombia has made it clear over the years that they are more interested in protecting their relationships with centers of power, with political power, and institutional power, and these massive research ties to Israeli military institutions, to universities, in Israel that are developing weapons technology that, Colombia is very excited about as an institution to be partnered with. Columbia University administration has been kind of trying to strengthen its ties, not just to, Israeli institutions, but also Israeli political figures. They want to enmesh, their institution with Zionist ideology. And when these Zionist organizations, come around and they are, encouraging the administration to crack down further on Palestine solidarity activists, Colombia has proved that they are more than happy to do so. That they will suspend, the freedom of speech of their students, that they will suspend the notions of academic freedom in order to, to make that happen. And so I think what we're seeing now at Columbia, but also, here at UC Berkeley, these even public institutions in theory, like the University of California, being always willing to, to break the back of student movements for Palestine, but now they really have free reign as it is. The Trump administration, just like the Biden administration before it, has basically said, your students, don't deserve free speech. That there is going to be a consequence for them if they speak out on Palestine. And so, I mean, this repression isn't new, obviously, and it is really telling that Columbia and now other institutions are handing over their students to these Gestapo ICE agents and not coming to the defense of free speech or academic freedom, and in fact being far too willing to trample all over it.
Yeah, and as one point that you raised there, I think is important to keep thinking about, which is the disinterest, maybe even hostility towards genuine knowledge and expertise, which runs, totally in the face, counter to the academic mission and project of universities, which is to value expertise, research, knowledge, and to provide that for public education of students and the broader society. But I think that's something we're seeing is a real turn away from wanting to have that expertise around, because it's embarrassing in how it exposes the ideological orientation of U.S. empire that completely shreds, it's like we've been learning, if we didn't already know before, all the sort of liberal institutions have been, international law and, freedom of speech and academic freedom. We've been learning, successively through the course of this, to what lengths the entire political and, economic elite of the West is willing to shred the architecture that it has created in order to privilege the West. It's like, well, if it can't be useful, we'll get rid of it. And so anyway, coming to you, Alex, as a scholar and a historian who's engaged in the enterprise of actually studying history so that we can illuminate and inform our contemporary social struggles for justice. How does this look from your perspective to see what's happening with the capitulation of the corporate neoliberal university in the wealthiest ones, the ones that are the most immunized from the effects of political pressure are capitulating, not only capitulating, but then being punished for their capitulation. It's not as if that, they win in the bargain, that at least they gain, something. So, what does it look like as somebody also who's in the university environment, seeing what's happening to scholarship, expertise, and the valuing of that in, the contemporary scene?
Team Barbarism is winning. And it's kind of depressing and bleak to be a part of it. And
that's the title of the episode. Title of the episode. Someone write it down.
See, I think with Nora, I made this mistake, I think, a couple weeks ago when I referred to Columbia's actions as cowardly, and it's way beyond cowardice. It's active collaboration, because the struggle over what a university should be and could be in the United States, I mean, this has been a struggle for the last 20, 30 years, right? There was, when neoliberalism started to hit US universities, it started to engender some of the same struggles that we've seen in other parts of US society, right? So why should universities be immune from some of these conflicts? And so one of the ways that I've been thinking about this is that these universities are active, whether implicit or explicit, collaborators in this project. Like, this is like the final push to really turn universities into, on the one hand, just centers of capital accumulation in different sectors, whether it's the University of Arizona and its weapons industry, as our comrade Taylor Miller has written about. Here at my university, it's a real estate with a university attached, or, and these are actually these public regional universities where most people in the United States go to school, right? Like Columbia and these Ivy Leagues, they get all the attention, but like a very small percentage of people ever go to these schools, and people freak out about it because this is where we get a certain elite reproduced. So it matters in that response. It matters also because they're just so wealthy. But we've seen this just 2-3 decades struggle to turn universities into, again, sites of capital accumulation on the one hand. The other hand, this really utilitarian approach to pedagogy and education, where we don't want critical thinkers, but we want just cogs in a rapidly changing US political economy. And so things like, critical thinking. I mean, even we're in the humanities, right? And the humanities have been taking a beating for a while. And we were supposed to reassert the importance and the value of the humanities using the same language as our enemies, right? Like, we're supposed to talk about skills, and we're supposed to talk about transferable skills, when what we offer are things like critical thinking, critical interrogation, critical analysis. And apparently those things are not of much value right now. And if anything, they're subversive and dangerous. And this is why there's been such a chilling effect at my university, and I think at many public universities. I know my university's on at least 2 federal lists, one that opens us up to ICE raids, and another where I think we're being investigated for alleged instances of anti-Semitism that has to do with the encampment that occurred here at ASU. So yeah, it's just, it's had the intent behind it was to chill protests, was to get people to think about the dangers and the risks of protesting an active genocide. And it's worked, right? Because the cost is too great for faculty, for staff, and especially for students, right? You had universities sticking their own police forces and other police forces on their own students, so it gets me back to the question, like, what is a university? A university fundamentally are the students and the faculty. And in the last 2 to 3 decades, we've seen the rise of the managerial class, the administrative class, and they're the ones who have taken control of the university, along with wealthy donors, endowment funds. And, they want to make sure that active resistance and speaking out against genocide and team barbarism will not happen. And what we saw, with the crackdown on the encampments, I mean, that was the purpose of it. And since then, right, universities, we know the universities are talking to one another. University leaders are talking to one another. They're coordinating, they're collaborating with best practices as to how to prevent similar types of protests from occurring. But so it creates like a crazy dissonance, right? Because we're not supposed to protest, but then we see the state of the world, and we see a genocide that keeps getting worse and worse and worse, like against I don't know how it can, but obviously it can. And we're expected not to be able to say anything about it. And then in the US, the political party that's supposed to represent like some sort of political opposition, their response is not even to do a hashtag resistance this time around. The response this time is either active collaboration because they believe in this genocidal project against Palestine, or their approach has been, well, these people are inefficient and not very good at, deporting migrants or waging foreign policy. We were much more efficient at doing that. And then you have people like Chuck Schumer just repeating the same lies that we heard in the weeks after October 7th. I mean, that is just unbelievable that someone can still be on a national platform and regurgitating those lies that have been used to justify a genocide, and there's like no cost to it. So yeah, this is why I say Team Barbarism is winning, and it's bleak times.
Yeah, Sina, you seem to be taking that phrase to heart. You thought that really sort of summed it up. I mean, we're both Canadians basically these days anyway. You're really one, and I'm kind of an honorary one since I usually live and teach there. When we look at the sort of overall, like these kinds of questions don't really come up that much in the mainstream, but there is this kind of concern where it's been a junior partner to the genocide rather comfortably until very recently. And that's only because of the way in which the Trump regime has been casting about for some kind of, Monroe Doctrine foreign policy orientation of trying to dominate in the Western Hemisphere. And so it's targeted, Greenland, Panama, but also Canada. And so I'm wondering if you think that there is an opening at all with this upsurge of Canadian nationalism to critique the Trump, agenda and to create some space where Canada might, provide some kind of different orientation or wake up to the fact that it's tied to this incredibly violent and dangerous behemoth, and that attempts to placate it and go along with it rather than to really support things like international law and institutions that might cushion it and protect it, that suddenly maybe people are starting to think about that. And so I'm just wondering, if you have any thoughts on what's been happening, not just on campuses, but what Alex started to talk about is the sort of broader kind of situation in the United States politically.
Yeah, there's a wow. This is what it feels like, huh? To have like 6 different questions thrown at you at once. Wow, this is like an empathy moment. Holy shoot! This is ADHD, the podcast. Finally, the tables are turned. So the first thing is Canadians. I have low hope for any sort of serious critical thinking around this. We are more than just a junior partner in the genocide. It's worse, actually, Adnan. We are a junior partner in the U.S. empire, and we are not really a partner. We are a clearinghouse for important natural resources. And as the episode that we did, Alex, Joe. Oh wait, Adnan, you were on that episode, weren't you? Yeah. We, of course, I forgot. We, because it feels like 100 billion years ago, but it was like a month ago, maybe not even. Part of what I said there, and I've been actually chewing this over. I was like, oh, that was an original thought. It's probably not an original thought, but it's the fact that there's never been in existence something like the U.S., Canada, Mexico, where you have sure, in history, nothing is ever the same and everything is different. Okay. And all human beings are snowflakes, fine. Notwithstanding that, there's no easy way to theorize and discuss and understand this behemoth relationship centered in the Western Hemisphere, that it's the US is so big and powerful that it's like a sun and we orbit around it in different ways, and labor and natural resources come from the south to the north, and mostly natural resources, but some labor goes south, north, goes south, goes from the north to the south. And this is, sure. And then within that economy, there's its own imbalance of Canada-Mexico relations, so that you have the similar relationship that the US has with Mexico, but to Canada. So like there's like entire Mexican like labor armada in Canada picking fruit and vegetables because it's cheaper to see them. Alex, I don't know if I told you this story, but I ran into a bunch of like Mexicans leaving that day for Mexico. It was the Thanksgiving. They were leaving PEI, and they were the seasonal laborers, and they were all going back home to Mexico. Like there's an organic whatever you could say what capitalism is. It is an organic connection between these three countries, two of whom do not have sovereignty over major aspects of their countryhood, right? Not only in terms of like because of the financial and political power that the one in between us sort of is able to marshal in its force, right? Because it's not just like the world's largest military power, it's also the world's largest financial power. Our currencies are kind of our tertiary sort of stand-ins for the US dollar, which is why like even without a tariff war, we lose because Canadian dollar is always going to lose against the US dollar. It's like rare that it can win. And it's probably the same case in Mexico, is that like you're built to be in a subordinate secondary position. And so that's kind of my reading of like the US, Canada, Mexico situation is that, yeah, like we are beholden to a psychotic, like imperial power, like a lot of the world. And maybe people in Canada will begin to realize like what our country has been a part of for basically its entire existence. Not, I mean, at different points, there's been ebbs and flows in the relationship, but like we are tied to this country. We are its main resource hub or one of them. And like without the US, our economy is zero, zilch. Like it's Joe over for the Canadian economy. So like just saying alone, oh, we're not standing up to your threats, Donald. I don't know why Americans sound like Southern American or Canadians sound like that, but it's not enough. It's too late for that. We've already integrated our economies. Like that ship sailed long ago. Economic independence. I mean, whatever. I'm not an economist. Maybe there can be different ways to do it, but I just feel that like people are going to realize soon in this country like what we live beside. Maybe if they haven't already. And another question is, I see this moment we're in, and I think, again, I think other people have said this, pretty sure, is that you have not strange, but you have a convergence of like Dragon Ball Z or Z, like proportions where like all of these like powerful energies are coming together. I don't even know if that happens. I'm doing this like based on cartoon images I've seen of it, but like there are some irrational energies coming together that are very powerful and extremely dangerous and violent. One of them being extreme expansionist, racist Zionism. Another one being Groyper U.S. nationalism. The third being revanchist American isolationism. And these are like strange bedfellows would presume that these can have normal bedfellows, but because all of these interests are like weird and wacky and contradictory, that it doesn't make sense anyways. But like this is the moment we're in where like every fascist country in the world flies an Israeli flag, like it's where like Nazi parties around the world love Zionists and vice versa because they hate the Muzzies more. And like this is a strange moment. And the Groyper right in the US has always wanted to go after like lib institutions. This like owning the libs is their entire existence. And so the dangerous aspect of this time is that the videos of like Mahmoud Khalil being arrested, that like his terrified wife, like you can hear her like speaking and stuff, and you can hear her. And then sure, this has been like, we have to obviously say that like this is a repetition of things that happen every day in America for decades and decades, that you already had this squad of like, race goons who like step into campuses who like, 20 years ago, I would hear stories. Obviously, Alex can probably tell us way more about like, how narratives of these people like just ripple through communities and their actions. And this is done on purpose because they're such a violent force. But now we're at the convergence moment is Zionists have like submitted a list of all of their thought criminal enemies. And basically, figuratively or literally so, it could be literal, but figuratively so, they've done it. And this U.S., like the Groyper regime in in the White House is happy to do their bidding. I mean, mind you, the Lib regime before it was happy to do their bidding, but in a different way and not so obviously. But now this convergence, this like racist convergence that I first said at the beginning, like now it feeds itself because Zionists get to arrest and neutralize their enemies, and the Groyper right get to sit and basically, excuse the like term, basically masturbate to images of, you know, like people getting their comeuppance from the state, because this is like what makes that portion of like Trump's base like come to life. And like they're all, and like the sadistic streak of like American culture in terrorizing its underclasses, it's like racialized underclasses, is like a cherished tradition of like the American white working class, middle class, and like the aristocracy elite. Like this is something that unites all sectors of America, is like terrorizing your racialized enemies into like knowing your power. And gee, I wonder what that has in common with a certain little movement called Zionism. Like these are powerful forces that are now, that's the danger. This is red meat to his base. Like those videos are red meat and they want more. And the lib media plays their role because they don't question the like policies. They don't question like why these guys got into trouble. Maybe they mention it, but it's purely framed through like, oh, this is against the law, right? Like, and so they benefit from like the hype around it. People tune into their shows. People are glued to their TVs. Advertising revenues go up. So like, I remember this from Trump 1. I learned my lesson from Trump 1, that the breaking news thing is part of the grift. That like the lib media plays its role of like halting you, like holding to your seat, like, you know, the thing I always cite here, like from Clockwork Orange, you know, like you're supposed to be glued to your chair. And that is part of the machine here too. And you know what? They feed the Groypers. So they're like part of the ecosystem here, of like the fash ecosystem, even insofar as they pretend to be outraged. I mean, look, they weren't outraged when their own guys were doing this before. I mean, it wasn't, you know, like it's not, these are not new things. The American state is a vicious, like horrible machine of terror and subjugation and incarceration. And people know this. People know the stats. You know that like it has 1/5 of the world's population and 20% of the world's prisoner population. Like you think that's done, you know, without an army of goons like these ICE guys? It's part of the machine. So anyways, that's my long rant. This convergence is very, very dangerous. It's very dangerous. We are there is because it's like unlimited energy behind it.
Well, I think what you've done is you've expressed very well how the barbarism is winning. It's those components that you're saying converge. And I think that's worth talking about a little more. We did see, of course, in the first Trump era, the sort of politics of sadism, of consuming images. You know, the kids in cages was actually thrilling some people, right? There was an audience for this. It wasn't just, you know, something that you could hold up to scandalize these people, because they, in fact, actually took some joy and some pleasure. Did something for people. This sort of politics of sadism. We see it the same in Europe, you know, with the scenes of, you know, oppressing, you know, immigrants or people drowning in the Mediterranean. It used to be something you would think would just shock and scandalize people, but now it's a sign for a certain constituency that these policies are working and that they are preventing, you know, brown people and black people from coming to Europe, right? So I think there's that, but I think the other component is something that ever since, you know, the Palestine laboratory, you know, it really resonated with me, that there is a way in which that kind of media and consumption and the politics of sadism is very closely joined with the new media, with the tech and the AI. And of course, when we're talking about what's happening under the current Trump administration, it's impossible to do so without really thinking about these interlinkings between and contradictions, but the way in which what we think of as these factional contradictions of the parts of the fascist right, the sort of more populist MAGA versus the tech billionaires, that while their class interests are, of course, very different, there is a mutually reinforcing way in which they're working, at least in the convergence that you were sort of talking about. So I think that's something worth thinking about a little bit more. I'm wondering if Nora and Alex, you have more to say on that component, because something Alex mentioned in his earlier remarks, so that there does seem to be a difference in the way in which the liberal reflex, there were indivisible chapters opening up absolutely everywhere. I mean, my parents went to, these indivisible chapters and would tell me, yes, people are really getting organized. And this isn't the first Trump era. It was absolutely just part of the culture that there's resistance. There's, it's so funny to think of the appropriation of that phrase, resistance, when we've been watching the heroic resistance of the people of Palestine, of Gaza, for 18 months. But this is the kind of language that was out there. We don't even have that kind of language now. There's something clearly very different in this cycle. And I think it's worth sort of thinking a little bit, about further. Nora, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw in 2016 with the first Trump administration and as you put it, this like performative resistance, this hashtag resistance movement, which was really, I mean, it was a complete ruse, right? Like, this is what the liberal class, especially like the boomer generation, thought was going to change something after sitting on their hands for decades and decades, passing laws that consistently defund U.S. public school systems, and because they want to keep their property taxes low. That kind of mentality. You can't just pop up and say, it was all because of the aesthetics. It was the aesthetics of Trump. It was this liberal shame of like, oh, he makes us look bad. We're not bad people. As Obama was, for 8 years deporting more people in the U.S. than any, previously combined presidents in American history, that kind of thing, or bombing, several countries at once, or, resupplying Israel's genocidal military over and over and over again. That was just fine. The aesthetics were great. He looked great in a suit, and oh my God, he's funny and he can sing Al Green. That's all that the liberals cared about. And then, of course, then this grotesque, more honest version of American power comes, to the White House, and all of a sudden, the liberals are up in arms. Not literal arms, because of course not, because you can't, right? But they want, they put on their pussy hats, and they went out and they marched, and they did these interpretive dances, and they did the hashtag resistance, and all over Berkeley I still see "Nevertheless she persisted" bumper stickers on Teslas, right? Like all of, so that's what the liberals thought was going to change something. No material change. Like they don't want to give up their low property taxes, and their enormous inherited wealth, right? They don't want to give that up. They don't want to make any material sacrifice. But it was just the aesthetics of like, oh my God, this is the most like grotesque representation, and we can't have that. We want to go back to brunch, was the adage. And so I think what the messaging was around this new wave of liberal pearl clutching at the this like gargoyle in the White House sort of thing is like, the messaging was not that Kamala Harris was a terrible candidate and that she and Biden oversaw and co-authored a literal Holocaust, or that, her policies were more right-wing than any Democratic candidate that came before her. The messaging was that it's the fault of stupid American people in not showing up for Kamala and instead electing Trump. And so there's this, I think there's this sense of like, well, you voted for him. We're not going to do anything, about it, kind of thing. We're just going to keep talking about how, incompetent he is and how gross he is, and all this condescension toward Palestinians in this country. People in Dearborn are now, persona non grata for the liberals because, the Arab and Muslim population there did not want to vote for the genocider party. And so there's just a lot of like resignation, I feel, from the liberals at this point. There's not even like a pretense of performing any sort of like, and then people are like, oh my God, Bernie and AOC are touring the country for I think it's calling Resisting Oligarchy Tour, right? What does that mean? To what end? What, so you're going to just sheepdog another genocidal maniac Democrat to continue the genocide that Trump is continuing from Biden? Is it a plan, for AOC to be elevated as like, the hope of the Democratic Party, which is in complete shambles and will never take responsibility for its own destruction, instead just blaming people? It's I don't know. It's just very, it all seems so prescribed and like, and it depends on the unwillingness of the liberals to actually imagine a better world and a better future. And instead to just kind of, laser focus on it's all because of Trump and Elon Musk, and that, that once we get them out of office, or, once they, are indicted, enough that they'll like, become better people, or we'll be back in the White House to what? To instill more neoliberal policies that will then be exploited again by another Republican administration. I mean, it's just, there's no analysis. There's no, wide scope, wide angle lens on this like, rotting American project. And so I'm just like, I don't know. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted by all of this performative liberalism here.
It is exhausting. And you put your finger on something that I've been talking about since late October 2023.
Adnan, sorry. Can I interrupt? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just had to say Alex has a hard stop in 10 minutes, I think. So I think so, maybe less. So we should let him go, and maybe we can keep going without him. Only the ghost of Alex.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's let Alex come in with any of his thoughts.
No, I think Nora is exactly right. I think one of the things that's driving us crazy is the lack of political imagination within the imperial core, and part of the reason is the fact that to outline or to present a liberatory agenda, you'd have to articulate a solution to, in my mind, the two most pressing issues right now, which is the genocide in Palestine and how we treat migrants in this country. And those two issues are connected in a variety of different ways. But when liberals and the political opposition in this country kind of fundamentally share the same premises that the revanchist right do when it comes to genocide in Palestine and the migrants, I mean, that's why we don't have a political alternative. This is why we have the, AOC and Bernie were in, you guys know this, and some listeners might know this, but my brother-in-law is a Republican congressman in Southern Arizona, and AOC and Bernie were there and had like a 20,000 person rally in his district. Great. But what are you telling people to do beyond just rally? Like, what are you? And then a day later, I see Bernie giving an interview to an American journalist who asks him, like, can you say anything nice about Trump's policies? And what does he say? He's doing a good job of fighting fentanyl, securing the border, and going against illegal immigration. That's the left. That's the so-called left. I'm wearing out that image from Children of Men online. Like, I can't post it anymore because it's just so. To be able to outline a liberatory future, we have to end the genocide in Gaza, and we have to discard with this stupid, idiotic, murderous framing of migration and border issues in terms of security. And I think, Sina, what you were saying is right on. Like, people in Trump's base do get off on seeing images that depict violence towards migrants. So when we saw recently with 200 Venezuelan migrants who, as far as I know, all of them came, quote unquote, the right way to the US. They were accused of all being members of a Venezuelan gang because of an executive order that Trump passed that said, if you're a Venezuelan, we can accuse you of being a member of this gang. Most of the people who were picked up had some sort of like tattoo that then ICE and DHS was able to justify as signifying their membership in the Tren de Aragua gang. One guy was a professional goalkeeper who had a Real Madrid tattoo, and that was enough for him to get sent. A 23-year-old gay makeup artist, Andre, who had some sort of ink work, that was used to justify him being sent to El Salvador, to this fascist dictator, Bukele, who is getting paid by the U.S. to use his insane labor camp / prison to punish these people. And there's a whole theatrical performance. When these people arrived in El Salvador, they were manhandled by Salvadorian security forces. When they get to the prison, they're held down and their heads are shaved. They're being slapped around. They're being punished, like physically assaulted. And these Venezuelan migrants have like no idea why they're there. And the way Trump talked about this was like he was praising Bukele for getting tough on these supposed Venezuelan gang members. And his base wants that. That team barbarism wants that. But again, so what's the alternative? Well, we're not even getting the hats this time, the pussy hats. What are we getting? We're getting a movement that shares the same basic premises as the revanchist right when it comes to Palestine and when it comes to migrants. And those are the two most pressing issues, I think, facing us today. They're connected in a variety of different ways. They're connected to climate change, because climate change, particularly with migrant displacement and movement, is also involved in this. I just saw that Cuba has lost like 25% of its population in the last 5-6 years because of the economic warfare that the U.S. has been waging in intensified form since the first Trump administration, but going back to the early 1960s. Venezuela, the same, facing economic warfare, and it's lost a huge percentage of its population as well. And that population comes here, and what do they face when they come here to claim asylum? They're shipped off to a Bukele labor prison camp, or in the previous administration, they faced Kamala Harris telling them, do not come. So again, like this is part of why I think these are such bleak, grim times. It's within the existing political framework in the U.S. I don't see a way through it. Like, I think it has to be something else. And if the left we have consists of AOC wearing aviator glasses and taking shots with Biden during the last campaign, or Bernie going back to his pre-2016 days and talking about illegal immigration and securing the border, I mean, there's like, part of me is like, there's no hope in the global north, and something's going to have to come from elsewhere. But nonetheless, I think that puts a responsibility on us to keep fighting, to keep speaking out against it, and to keep pushing these monsters. That's what we have to do. We can't despair. We have to keep fighting back.
Absolutely. What can team civilization do? I mean, I think that's the big question, and we have to be thinking about that. I think you're right, though, that the lead is going to come actually from the global south in those spheres where resistance really does take a sharp form of confronting empire, colonialism, and capitalism, where it's at its most intense in terms of its exploitation, where the illusions don't exist. Because what we've been talking about up to this point about, kind of liberal politics, which is so status quo and establishmentarian, is it's built on all of these illusions that the status quo can continue, which is why it has no vision, even an illusory vision of the future that is anything other than just, maybe some improvements on the current kind of model. And that's a big problem, is that it's the right wing, it's the fascists that are presenting some kind of, even if vulgar, but compelling vision for the future for certain constituencies. And we have to be in the business of countering that. But perhaps it's worth turning, since I mentioned picking up on what you noted, Alex, that, something to change this political dynamic is maybe not going to come from, movements in the global north. They may have an important role to play, in solidarity, but that, resistance is coming from the South, and it's worth a global South, and it's worth turning maybe to the Middle East and to the situation, especially vis-a-vis one of the two crucial issues you mentioned, in Palestine. And so I'm wondering, perhaps, what's been happening since this is, I think, a real crucial crossroads here for the future of the resistance, because it heroically managed to force Israel to accept at least the beginnings of a ceasefire agreement that could have turned, with appropriate political pressure, could have turned into perhaps a more lasting situation for Gaza to rebuild. But, with the siege on Gaza that continued and was enforced really brutally, ongoing for about 2-3 weeks, in violation of the original ceasefire agreement. And now, in this last week, the return to large-scale massacres. The question is which way the resistance? And I've just been noting that it seems, it must be so much harder to mobilize after you've had a taste of at least some hope, and then to have all of that dashed. You listened on the Electronic Intifada, the wonderful figure Abu Bakr Abid, who I wish could go and cover football matches, and do what he was meant to do. But the fact that a little bit of hope being pulled away from you is almost the hardest thing you can deal with. But Alex and Nora, let's talk about what's happening in Palestine, and how that resistance may be reconstituting itself, and what hope that might give to a change in the dynamic of Zio-US empire.
Well, you should really be asking John Elmer. But yeah, the resistance has been, a surprise, I think, to the enemy. I think Israel, and this is what Israel has always thought about Palestinians resisting their oppression and colonization. There's this thing, and I know Fanon talks about this too, where, European settlers kind of think that indigenous people that they are colonizing will just kind of surrender easily and give up and not fight back. And Israel keeps forgetting this over and over and over again. And I think, Israel was so humiliated on October 7th, obviously, and, that's a whole other show. But in the 17 months, now almost 18 months of this genocide, I think they thought it was going to be a walk in the park. That they didn't know, they didn't analyze the organization of the Palestinian resistance fighters. They didn't understand how they operated. They never dared to try and go into the massive tunnel network underneath Gaza, because the Palestinian fighters had figured out how to booby trap it. Israeli soldiers are the most cowardly and bumbling military force, I think, especially when you see how well funded and well equipped they are. They have everything at their disposal, and they can't defeat a guerrilla army in the way that they think they could. And they still haven't defeated it. You saw, like, during those, during the prisoner exchanges, Israeli media was like aghast at how many fighters are still there. And that there have been many new recruits in the last 18 months. People aren't going to just surrender and say, fine, you can have my land, after 75 years, 80 years, fine. So the resistance is always holding a mirror up to the just craven, not just brutality, but cowardice of the Israeli soldiers and the military in general. And now we see, since the genocide, wide scale, relentless genocide kind of restarted on March 18th, like, you can see, Israel is they're drone striking. They're using drones and fighter jets and tanks that are stationed along the so-called buffer zone that keeps widening. You don't see much, troops on the ground, fighting eye to eye with Palestinian resistance fighters, because they're that cowardly. So I don't know. It remains to be seen, what comes next. What if, there's all this analysis too by Israelis, by military strategists that say that Israel's military is completely weakened, that there's entire, battalions or companies inside the military that are refusing to go back to full-scale war. This is full-scale war, but, refusing to go back. There are, it's a mostly reservist force now. And because of the cost of this genocide, Israel's economy is completely collapsing. They just passed a budget, to avert total government shutdown, which I was like, God damn it. But the budget includes, basically bribing the ultra-Orthodox, fanatically Zionist settler movement, giving them millions and millions of shekels to continue their land theft in the occupied West Bank. And at the same time, in order to do that, in order to bribe, the ultra-nationalists and to keep this genocide going, Israeli school teachers are going to have a massive pay cut. So, like, the social services, like, total austerity budget. I don't think that people, want to take part in that society if, all the milk and honey dreams that being a settler colonist from Europe, to go and take someone's land and then to have, whatever you want, a really, a good interest rate on your mortgage and, really good, teachers and bus drivers. If everyone's getting a pay cut and your taxes are going up, to pay for the ultra nationalists and to pay for the slaughter of an indigenous people miles away, like, I don't think that that society is long for this world. And so I just keep hoping that their that their economy continues to be in shambles, and that eventually, that might be what ends this. I mean, it's like Alex said, it's very bleak. It's very bleak, but that's kind of where we're at. And plus also fighting on, like, Israel isn't just genociding Palestinians. They're bombing Syria and Lebanon. Like, they're still, they're occupying the south of Lebanon still, and mowing down all these villages. Like, so how many fronts is Israel extending itself to? I don't see that as sustainable at all.
Well, I mean, part of what's been more successful, because you're right, if they actually had to extend and deploy and try and control these territories themselves with the resources that they have, even though they're given so many, armaments and support from, the West, starting with the United States principally, but Germany, etc., it would be overextension. But one of the things that has happened, and when you raise Syria, is one of the more successful gambits of the empire has been to try and recruit, the compradors, the betrayers, the treasonous forces from within the Middle East to do a lot of the dirty work of the empire. And we know, of course, that's an old story in Syria of the dirty war that happened there. But of course, it was so incredibly frustrating in December, January, February, how many people who were putatively Palestine solidarity activists, were celebrating the HTS takeover of the country and demanding that we celebrate the end of the Assad regime. And nobody was interested in the Assad regime. But if you actually are a pro-Palestine solidarity activist, and that's where your sympathies lie, I thought it should be so obvious that this was a detrimental and destructive set of events and changing of the conditions in the Middle East. In fact, actually, I do want to perhaps come to talking about Syria a little bit more, but through the venue of what's the HTS regime in Syria has meant. I mean, for the cause of Palestine, there's an excellent article by an anonymous Palestine correspondent in The Cradle, how Syria's HTS is quietly dismantling the Palestinian cause. And it goes in great detail through what has been happening with all the different factions, the refugees, Palestinian refugees in the camps, and the overtures to recognizing, no relationship whatsoever with the actual resistance in Gaza, but overtures and collaboration with the PA. And the conclusion of this excellent article that I recommend to everybody is that, HTS, Syria under HTS has become fully absorbed into the US paradigm on Palestine. And of course, that shouldn't really come as a surprise. But it's in very clear detail how many of the different Palestinian factions that had their headquarters and important leadership in Syria, how many of those have been either expelled from the country, jailed, incarcerated, and how many of the resources have been expropriated by HTS, and so that there can be a consolidation of the PA over the Palestine movement in everywhere that's possible. But Sina, I mean, and also I just wanted to say I'd love to have Shir Hever on, because he gives me some hope when he talks about, as he's done on your show multiple times, about the economic consequences of the war on Israel. The one question that I have about this is that, as we know, so many of the Ashkenazi elite, the educated class, have been migrating out and taking the opportunities for those second passports. Avram Berg, that wrote this book even about a decade ago, saying Zionism, the project of the Zionist state of Israel, is finished because everybody who can is finding a second passport and a citizenship in Europe or the United States and finding a way to leave if they can, and that there's no future, for it. But that's of course accelerated even more. But what it's left though is this hardcore, extreme religious Zionist community that is very ideologically committed. They're not committed necessarily to being a liberal Western, liberal democratic state in the fictions that they might have thought of Israel as being. They're not actually even interested in that. They're interested actually in the Crusader state. That's what they want. But that population is there, and it seems like there's no, and that there's also a large number of the people who are really connected with this movement are those Jews from Arab countries, that now would imagine that they don't have another place to go. The Ashkenazi elite, they do have places to go. And so we have this kind of situation where it's withering away a certain kind of Zionist project, but it's being reduced down to a very hardcore, committed group. And I wonder what the consequences of this are going to be as the situation continues and develops over the coming period. But Sina, I wanted to get you in on this, and of course, if you want to talk about Syria as well, something that we have to, because we haven't discussed the massacres on the coast and the way in which HTS is basically just the Muslim Zionist project. Okay, this is the Al-Qaeda Zionist type project. So there's no. It makes sense that they are actually collaborating, in this context.
Yeah, I mean, Zionist agents control Syria. It's straight up like that. Zionist agents, colluded with Takfiri mercenaries, Contras, facilitated through Turkey, Jordan, funded by the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the worst coalition of monsters, pedos, aristocrats, phony baloney, or, evil scum people, CIA, Mossad, everyone gang together to destroy this country. And our liberal media class cheered it on, and they're still cheering it on. And in fact, now that these so-called Syrian moderate rebels have taken control, and they did exactly what we tankies said they would do when we defended the Syrian state, they're doing that now, and they're nowhere to be found. Like the people who made for careers off of Syria, pretending to care. I mean, I've said this a lot. Pretending to care about people in another country is a lucrative industry in the U.S. It's one of the sort of foundational tools of compradorism, of the vast army of compradors, and we'll never see something like this. I don't think there'll ever be something as elaborate as the Syria dirty war, which to this day, I mean, I did an episode, I forgot to post. I'm sorry, William, I didn't mean to hide it behind the paywall. I just forgot to post the preview of it because it's really long. But I even had people fighting in my Patreon comments. That never happened before. Like, it's this divisive cudgel issue that breaks the Palestine liberation movement. And that's obvious. I mean, that's obvious. And it's terrible what we're seeing happen on the coast. I do think that these guys won't last. I do think that part of the story here is like the unrest in Turkey, which in some ways resembles a lot of like the bullshit sort of astroturf popular unrest, but is probably, like, to my eyes, but mind you, I've only seen the sort of Western facing Turkish media, which is primed for this stuff, because Turkey plays an immensely important role in the US imperial project, both in terms of its military and its also economic and its geographic location as like a key, but also its ability to play everyone off itself, off of each other, right? So like, we know its dealings with Russia, we know its dealings in the Ukraine, like, this is dirty business. And Turkey is like a prime example that like geopolitics is filled with mafia goons, and Erdogan and Turkey being one of the biggest mafias out there because it has a huge population of educated, very educated, relatively affluent people in Turkey, which has a huge landmass and also resources and all these different things. And it's a weapon of the West. I mean, they store nukes there for a reason pointed at Russia. So it's like it's, so part of the story here is that to watch the same forces now, eat away at Erdogan. I mean, will it last? I don't know. It's pretty rough in Turkey right now. I just can't help but notice that just today I got an email that Hamid Dabashi, old Columbia guy, Iranian studies scholar, he's just publishing a book on revolt in Iran. Obviously about what happened in 2022 now. It's like a book that's like 2 years too late, Hamid. I'm sorry to tell you, but like part of the story here that I couldn't help but notice is that radicalism in some countries is a profitable venture for scholarship and academia and for the media class. Like radicalism of a certain variety. And the radicalism in Syria was extremely valuable, was potent, and it helped like hundreds of goons that we still live with today launch their media careers because of them wringing their hands over exactly what's happening now on the coast. Exactly what they said was happening in Syria is now happening to Alawites in Syria and other minorities. And and we have a media class that has just let it happen. I mean, we have a Zionist media class, guys. That's what that means. And at some point, the Iranian liberals, who either knowingly or unwittingly, they actively collaborate with them because they provide a very useful service to Zionists insofar as saying bad things about the regime, right? Like this is how corporatism works today. That can it serve the U.S. imperial interest and its vassals? So then it's used and channeled, and it's there's different sites of it. There's different cultural spheres. There's the Arabic cultural sphere where Al Jazeera Arabic rests on the top of a whole massive archipelago of Arabic media that just filters in sectarianism all day long, like in the service of American imperial at the end of the day, right? Qatar is an occupied base of the American empire. Saudi Arabia, same thing. Much in the same way Germany is occupied military base. It's the same thing. And so everyone should be it should be sobering what we've watched. Not just in Palestine, but in Syria and across Yemen. We haven't talked about Yemen, what's happening in Yemen. I mean, they want to genocide Yemen again, right? This isn't even the first genocide. This is the second one that they faced in less than 2 decades. Less than 1 decade. What am I saying? 2015 is when it kicked off. So they want to genocide Yemen, and the U.S. empire wants to flex so hard because it can't do anything else. It can't make travel in the Red Sea safe for the vassals of the U.S. empire. So it's just going to destroy Yemen even more, which they were already doing either directly and sometimes painting American planes with the flag of Saudi Arabia. But we know that it's America doing the bombing, right? Jordanian Air Force does not exist, guys. Does not exist. It is an Air Force in name only. If you're an American imperialist, you're a British imperialist, would you ever sell jets to independent people in a military you couldn't control? Totally no, right? You do the dirty work, you get people in a country like Jordan. These are figments, so the facade is acting right now and it's doing its bit. And, Sisi is helping with the engagement of Gaza as he was designed. Jordan, the tomato king, he's still feeding Zionist settlers. Right. So the machine is running. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, they haven't even, right? Normalization is basically still on the agenda, as much as we still like to say it, but they can't do it now. But, the enemies are lining up, and they're gunning for Iran next. It's quite a moment we live in, guys. It's quite a moment.
It is. It is. It does remind me, I had planned to ask you both about Yemen, and particularly in that context where I introduced the question or the problem for, Gaza, that they've had to continue again and restart a whole resistance movement after heroically waging an incredible guerrilla struggle against the entire West's forces, because again, it may have been Israel that's doing it, but in name only because all of the military supplies, there's all kinds of intelligence and monitoring that was taking place and being shared with them. I mean, this was really everything that the West could throw at them, and the Gazans survived, and now they have to do it all again. And that to me it feels so daunting. But then you look at the example of Yemen, and you find some hope, because even with the reestablishment of the open war and bombardment of Yemen, they're very defiant, and that's something really to examine, how it is that they've been managing to do this. It's just very heroic and inspirational to see. So I don't know if you had any thoughts, Nora, on things that Sina had been saying, or about Yemen itself, and what it means to the Palestinian cause and the broader regional alignment. I mean, we were talking about the many kind of subversive successes of that's the chaos that Syria has sown, that serves the interests of U.S. empire and Israeli expansion. And hegemony in the region. But there is this great example of Yemen maintaining a principled, heroic stand.
Yeah. As my colleague Ali Aviña says, it was, what Yemen is doing in the Red Sea is a humanitarian intervention against the genocide in Gaza. It's a siege for siege. Yemen is the only country in the region, besides the Lebanese resistance, of course, but Yemen is the only country in the region that is actually fulfilling its obligations under international law to stop a genocide, using their, physically trying to block Israel's economy from functioning, as a matter of consequence for enacting a Holocaust on people in full view of the world. It's, Israel brags about how many children it slaughters. Israel gets to close the crossings at a whim, plunging people who have spent 15 months starving into yet another starvation campaign. I mean, every single international law on the books has been made absolutely worthless because they can't be enforced, because it's Israel and the US that are doing this Holocaust. And so Yemen has said heroically that, fine, we have this one piece of leverage. We have a literal bottleneck, right, in the Red Sea. And this is the thing that we can do to fulfill our obligations under international law to stop a genocide. And they have been absolutely steadfast. And I mean, I can't ever forget how, when Israel was bombing Yemen sometime last year, and the Yemenis were in the streets, cheering because they said every bomb that lands on our country is one less bomb that lands on Palestine. And what other, that is the definition of, it's not just, it's like something else. It's like a whole different genre of solidarity. Yemen could just sit back and try and rebuild its own wrecked economy and its own wrecked, infrastructure, because of the dirty war that it suffered, that completely eviscerated its country. But instead, Yemen is teaching the world that no matter how much you try and batter a people, they will still rise. And not just rise, but they will rise in defense of other people who are being battered by the same, imperialist forces. And it is Yeah, I mean, it is heroic to see that, and and that's why the U.S. is hitting it so hard, because that's the only language that the West speaks, is bombing and violence and threats and just disgusting dehumanization, and Yemen is standing tall against it.
Yeah, and I think it's partly because that example of solidarity that you were talking about, Nora, is just so dangerous and disturbing to the West. That what is wrong with these people? We need to make an example of them, that this not be a model that others might embrace, being inspired by this incredible amount of solidarity. They truly have written themselves into the annals of history um, for this solidarity in enacting really the really only good example we can think of, the responsibility to protect doctrine. I mean, really actually implemented. But it does remind me, just as a historian, of the other time when the Crusaders were in the Red Sea, which is, in 1182, when Reynald of Chatillon put galleys in the Red Sea and threatened actually to attack the holy city of Mecca and destroy it. Then there was resistance that heroically managed to stop them. And that story does end in 1291 with the end of the colony in Acre and the restoration of essentially a united Palestine. And so we'll hope, and we have to hope, that this particular Crusader history will not last even as long as the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. That's what we have to be looking forward to. So, on those hopeful notes, Nora, you've been so generous with your time. We should move to a conclusion. But before we conclude this episode, I think, Sina, you wanted to. We've moved from a kind of hopeful point of history and the future, but also there are practical things that we can do to show our solidarity in various ways, and one of which is helping to support the people of Gaza. And I know you have an appeal you want to make during this.
Yeah, I wanted to put this at the beginning of the episode, but maybe I'll just make a note of it. But I've been running a fundraiser for this young man, Muhammad, in Gaza. He is taking care of his siblings. His parents were martyred about 10 years ago. He's sort of, basically this orphan story. And he's been taking care of his siblings for a long time. And they've been displaced 5 times in this war. And I got him to film some footage for me, and I was going to make a video. And then he sent it when I was traveling, and I couldn't get to it. And by the time I got to it, he had to flee his home again. So even the home that he had of tents that I have on camera is gone too. So I'm hoping the people who are listening to this, if you can help him out, we can cheer him up. Maybe we can get some donations. If you're listening to this and you're a fan of Taking Therapy, you're a fan of the podcasts, please consider helping Mohammed out. I haven't told him that I'm doing this. It's just like a little surprise I want for him to to just, I want to see him get to wake up one day and be like, wow, it really went up, because they want to buy some solar panels. So it's beyond now. We've actually sort of hoping to expand the fundraiser, because if you can help Muhammad out, please think of it. I'll put the link in the description.
Terrific. And if you're just interested, why, particularly during Ramadan, you should be charitable, non-Muslims, Muslims alike. You can also check out a new short 3-part video explainer about Ramadan on the channel, and where we also did talk a little bit about empathy with the people of Gaza, who are undergoing an extraordinary non-voluntary fast. Muslims around the world are fasting to express their piety. The least it should do is to redouble our efforts to show solidarity and support for people of Gaza. So I want to thank you, Nora. How can people, follow your work? Everybody knows, but just tell them.
Electronicintifada.net and on YouTube at Electronic Intifada. And yeah, we do our live streams every Thursday at 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. And yeah, just follow. I'm on all the social. You can find me. I'm there. But thanks so much, Adnan.
Oh, it was such a pleasure to have you on, and hopefully this won't be the first and last time. It'll be the first of many. I look forward to more conversation. And Sina, how can people keep up with you?
Oh, I'm on
keep up with
who can I can't even keep up with myself. I have my Twitter. Don't follow me. Don't listen to my show, East Podcast. Don't watch the channel, except if it's Thank You Therapy. Then watch that. But yeah, just please, people, give your money to Muhammad. Please, if you give your money, how about this? If anybody's listening to this, I won't put this in. This is only for the diehard listeners. If you give Muhammad, let's say, $25, then I'll give you free 1-year subscription to Patreon. East is a Podcast Patreon. Just message me and say I donated. It's be $25, okay, at least, or more. Obviously, give more if you can. But yeah, I'll give you a year subscription. That's well worth it. I think it's a good deal. If you paid for it, it would be like double that price. So please support him, and I'll put this at the beginning. Thanks, Adnan.
Sounds good. Well, listeners, you can, of course, hopefully follow this show, like, support, subscribe. And of course, follow Guerrilla History and like, support, and subscribe that show as well. We're hoping to do a lot more on this channel as well, so do stay tuned. If you subscribe and support and follow me on Twitter at Adnan Husain, you'll get all the updates and so forth. And if you want to support the show, you can at patreon.com/Adnan Husain. But don't do that if it's a choice between helping Muhammad or helping this show. If you can do both, wonderful, but choose the more important one. And with that.